Welcome to the 2018 Candidate Forum, presented by the Kiwanis Club of Issaquah, the Issaquah branch of AAUW, and the Issaquah Cable TV Commission. I'm Debbie Berto, and with me is Judy Rogers, and we're your moderators for tonight. In the interest of full disclosure, we would like to tell you that Judy and I have both made campaign contributions to Lisa Callan's campaign, and I also contributed to Bill Ramos. In the next hour, we will hear from the 4 candidates for the Washington State Legislature, District 5. They are Chad Magandans and Bill Ramos for Position 1, Lisa Callan and Paul Graves for Position 2. The forum will begin with 2-minute opening statements from each candidate. Questions will then follow with 1-minute responses and a 30-second rebuttal from the first responder. Our timer is seated in the front row and will raise a warning when 15 seconds remain and a stop signal when time is up. Please be careful with your time or we will stop you. Questions have been gathered from the community. If an answer needs further clarification, we may ask a follow-up question. Audience, you have been supplied with note cards to submit questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can. Questions may not be directed to only one candidate. Please raise your hand and your note card will be collected. Audience, we also ask that you hold your applause until the end of the forum. The last question for this evening will come from the candidates themselves. Each will ask their challenger a question. Each candidate will then have 1 minute for their closing remarks. So let's get started. I'd like to keep the forum as friendly as Issaquah is known to be, and therefore we will only use first names going forward. We'll begin with opening statements, starting with Chad, followed by Bill, then Lisa and Paul. Take it away, Chad.
Thanks, Debbie. So many of you know me. I've already served 2 terms representing the 5th District down in the legislature in Olympia. I was elected in 2012 and 2014 with 10 and 18-point margins, respectively. In 2016, I challenged the incumbent senator and got 49.7% of the vote. And this is my opportunity to return to Olympia in the House with the seat vacated by my former seatmate, Representative Jay Rodney. I came up through the education system. I was a volunteer for the PTA, Washington State PTA Outstanding Advocate in 2009. I served on the school board. I was an advocate with League of Education Voters and Stand for Children. I was president of the school board and then elected and served as a ranking member of the House Education Committee, as well as a lead negotiator for the McCleary school funding remedy. One of the 4 folks who basically doubled state funding for education over 8 years. And I'm very proud of the work we did there. It's quite a collaborative effort. My background is I'm an engineer, Cornell engineering degree, spent 12 years in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear submarine officer, and then 20 years at Microsoft, 10 years full-time, another 10 as a contractor. I'm now a CXO of a startup. We focus on voter analytics, trying to apply my political and my technology background to a common cause. I got involved because of an experience that I had with Fred Butler, who's in the audience right now. I was part of this group called Safe Roads for Issaquah, and I was trying to find a way to eliminate some of the congestion through our school zones, particularly down 2nd Avenue here. And I got the bug. I call it my Jerry Maguire moment, where I realized no one's going to solve this problem for me. If I'm going to make a difference, I need to get involved, and that's what I did. And so I've been very happy about the engagement I've had over the past few years, and I feel like I've made great progress building great coalitions down Olympia to accomplish great things. I'm looking forward to returning to complete that work.
Bill.
Thank you. And I'm Bill Ramos, running for the open seat. And just want to thank you all for having this forum and this opportunity. And I want to tell you why I think I'm uniquely qualified to represent the 5th District. First of all, the 5th District is 7 cities connected by unincorporated rural King County. And to live To represent the district, you have to know both parts of that city, the cities and the rural area. Well, I worked for the U.S. Forest Service out of the North Bend, and I lived here in the district of 30 years. And in that time I worked there, I covered from North Bend all the way down to Enumclaw, up through Skycomish, through Carnation and Duval. And on a daily basis, I was traveling throughout the district working and managing national forest lands. Prior to here, I lived in some very rural areas where the whole county population was less than 20,000 people. So I know rural living, and I've been out knocking on doors in these rural areas, and people are a little surprised when they see a candidate knocking on a door out there, but they're very excited to talk to you once they realize what you're doing there, and have some lovely conversations. And so representing the rural parts of the district are very important to me because often they get overlooked a little bit. I've also working with cities. I'm currently on Issaquah City Council, so I know how cities work and what they need and how they're really set up to do a lot of good things, but sometimes they need a little help from the state to make things work on a more regional basis where they can really work together and get some good things to happen. So as I mentioned, I had 30 years with the U.S. Forest Service, so I'll be bringing those 30 years of environmental stewardship and land management with me at a professional level. I also then worked for 10 years with the U.S. Department of Transportation and also had my own private consulting firm in the area of transportation. So I will also be bringing those skills with me to help in the to help our district get moving again, because traffic and transportation is one of the most important things in our district, and I will be bringing those professional level skills with me to help us get moving again. Thank you, and I do want to earn your vote.
I'm Lisa Callan, and I came to the Northwest back in the late 80s, kind of dating myself, straight to work for Boeing. I have a math and computer science background, and I started to work for Boeing to do simulation software engineering, design, and validation for their new airplanes, and definitely was thrilled to be a part of creating aviation future for Boeing, and loved the Northwest and fell in love with it and started my family here. And as I've gotten engaged and connected, I moved on into software full life cycle development consulting and project management work, and did consulting nationally and across globally to help businesses move into the e-commerce world. And then from there, when I became a mother, dove right back into my education roots. I come from a family of educators, and started to connect in as a volunteer with our school systems, our public school systems, and in volunteering as a PTSA member, as a parent in the classroom, engaging there and knowing what we needed to get done, and work hard to find out what we needed to get done to make sure every child thrived in our school systems. I had the great opportunity to run for the school board in the Issaquah School District, and now I'm serving in my second term on the school board, where I've served as the legislative advocacy rep for 2 years and as school board president, and currently was past president this last year. And now I serve on the State School Directors Association Legislative Committee. So I'm quite aware and very well deep into all of the education issues, not only here in the Issaquah School District, across the 5th legislative district and also across the state, and what we need to do to make sure we're moving forward and getting our kids their best chance to be thriving adults and a strong economy and a strong democracy in the 21st century. So as we're moving forward with that, when you're dealing with education, you get involved in every other issue that's out there in front of us, whether we're dealing with growth, we're dealing with our traffic, our taxes, affordability, healthcare. All of those come into how we operate a school district. All of those are areas that I'm deeply engaged in with our community. And thank you for letting me have a chance to be with you tonight.
Well, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Paul Graves. I'm finishing my first term as your state representative here in the 5th Legislative District. I need to apologize right off the bat. My wife gave birth to our son 6 days ago. So if I seem tired, it's only because I'm very, very tired. But I'm finishing up my first term as your state representative, and I've tried to approach this job thoughtfully and reasonably and independently, and that approach has worked better in Olympia than I would have thought. Even though I was a freshman in the minority, I got 5 bills passed, which was the most of anybody who was a freshman. We got terrific work done at the main cause of our traffic congestion here in East King County, the Highway 18 I-90 interchange, where the project we got moved up by 6 years. So the design wasn't even going to start on the fix for that project, and it's going on right now. And that was a huge bipartisan win involving a lot of bipartisan work. I ran on a platform last time, and I'm running the same platform this time, of great schools, getting traffic moving, property tax relief, and open government. Because I was willing to work with people on both sides of the aisle, a third-party group said that my voting record made me the most independent legislator in Olympia. I will always represent you over any particular party or special interest. And in case you have any doubt about that, I was the only East Side legislator to vote against this bad bill that would have shielded most of our records from public review, and in fact had my own bill that would have opened our records up the same way that every other elected official in the whole state is open. I think at a bare minimum, partisanship aside, you deserve an open and transparent government, and I'll keep fighting for that. I'm really grateful that you're out here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to answering questions. Thank you.
All right, we are going to start with Chad. Chad, Initiative 1639 will make substantial changes to our gun laws. Do you support the changes? What other changes would you support, and are you willing to be a leader for change?
So I stepped away from my caucus and voted for House Bill 1840 in my first year down the legislature that allowed us to go after guns from folks who are under restraining orders. And I have not been a straight party line man when it comes to the Second Amendment, but I do fight to defend the entire Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, and that includes the due process, so we don't take away these rights without a thoughtful, judge-approved process. I actually was on the school board when we had the shooting right here outside of Issaquah High School, where a Maple Valley man was killed after opening fire with 2 rifles. And the folks were actually in the stadium attending a football game when that happened. It was pretty disturbing. I've actually been inside Issaquah High School when we had a security lockdown, and we knew it wasn't a drill. It wasn't until about a half hour later that the good guys with guns showed up and told us we were safe again. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I want to focus on where the underlying causes here. 25% nationwide of 15 to 19-year-olds deaths are caused by suicide. It's 37% in the state of Washington. I love the fact that we've had a partnership with Swedish Issaquah, so we've had mental health professionals in all of our comprehensive high schools, and I want to continue to support our school resource officers. Those are the measures I think we can do to keep our kids safe, going after the root cause.
Bill?
Thank you. Short answer to the question, yes, I support 1639. I do believe, I'm one of those people you don't always see. I'm a Democrat and I'm a gun owner. As I mentioned, I lived in some pretty rural areas most of my life, and I know what it's like, and I understand how people see guns differently depending upon where they live and what they do. And I can bring understanding of that to work on continuing to have that improve. So 1639 will make improvements that I support totally in common sense gun safety to help limit those folks that shouldn't have guns, to stop them from getting them, that would either do harm to themselves or others. So I do support that, and I will be a leader in that, and I can work with everyone across the aisles on that because of my understanding of the situation. Thank you.
Chad, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal of Bill's comments, and I would say make sure that you are specific to the question about Initiative 1639.
So, has anyone actually read 1639? It is one of the most complex people's initiative I've ever seen. In fact, the problem they had getting it approved is that it wouldn't fit on the back of the petition sheet. It was so complex. And I worry about a process where we are now legislating through popular vote in such detail. I'm concerned about the scope of this bill, and while I do support elements of it, I think this is the wrong way to go about enacting such significant reforms to our Second Amendment rights.
Okay, Lisa and Paul, would you like me to repeat the question before you answer? Mm-hmm. Yes? All right. Initiative 1639 will make substantial changes to our gun laws. Do you support the changes? What other changes would you support, and are you willing to be a leader for change? Lisa.
I do support 1639. There's a range of work that's being done there, and primarily the goal is to reduce gun violence. It's not about taking away people's Second Amendment rights. And in fact, I think in Washington State, we have a stronger right to bear arms in Washington State than we do in the Second Amendment. So from that perspective, I think the primary goal here, certainly is to of 1639 is to place regulations on long guns and on rifles that are very similar to what we already have in place for handguns. So if we extend the waiting period by 10 days, we do extensive background checks. When we put all the safe gun storage, making sure that we're doing everything we can to keep the guns, as was mentioned before, out of those hands that shouldn't have them. That's the critical piece. But that's one component. Besides 1639, there's so much more we need to do, which is including having services available to our kids and our youth and our families when and where they need them. Mental health, for example, and I've got the stop sign.
All right, Paul.
Well, I really appreciate the question. I'm a no on all the initiatives this year. I tend to be no on most initiatives because I think it's the lawyer in me. I end up reading all of them, and they have a lot of things that need a lot of fixing. And most notably in 1639, it makes it so that if you have a gun at your house and somebody comes and steals it and uses it in a crime, you are a felon. And I think that that particular provision is going to fall most heavily on the poor and minority communities. I think it's a social justice issue, and I think that that's the wrong way to go about encouraging safe storage. There's some really good ideas in there, though, but if ultimately there are 9 issues in a bill and one of them is bad, I think you have to vote no on it. But separate and apart from that, I think that we can protect Second Amendment rights while still reducing gun violence. I voted for the bump stock ban, for example, that we voted on this year, and also the voluntary waiver provision. And in fact, with the bump stock ban, I was willing to work with Democrats to get a buyback provision that ultimately made that bill even more bipartisan than it already was. I think we need to address mental health really seriously. Down into Houma School District, which is in this district, we had 2 suicides to begin the year. And I think that if you really want to get at gun violence, you've got to really start there because that's the bulk of the deaths.
All right, thank you. And Lisa, 30-second rebuttal.
I think the reason why 1639 exists is because there wasn't enough action taken by the legislature already, and the people are wanting to have safer communities and safer schools. So even if an initiative isn't perfect, I know that legislation can be placed to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences, that people's rights are protected, and if there is a theft, if it was safely stored, that we can take care of those citizens. We realize that there are 2 youth per week in the state of Washington that are dying by suicide. This is much more complex than the mass shootings, much more complex, and we have to solve it on all fronts.
Okay, let's move to our second question, and this time we're going to start with Bill. Echo Glen Children's Correctional Center gets education services from the Issaquah School District. However, the school district only receives about half the funding for these children as they would for kids not in institutions. Do you believe this is fair, and why or why not?
No, it isn't fair. Every child should get the same amount of funding and the same amount of education. I believe that across the board everywhere. And when we have places where there is discrepancy, it becomes, to me, a social equity issue. Those kids that are there, they probably could use a little extra, if nothing, because they've made a mistake to get there. So they might need a little extra counseling, something, whatever they need to get them back on track so they can become regular member of society and free and clear and working and doing those things. So we need to make sure that every child gets a fair shot in our system, and it should not change by your zip code. It shouldn't change by where you are, where you're living at the time. Everybody should have the same opportunity.
Hey, Chad?
No, I don't think that's fair. And that was something we struggled with when I was on the school board. There is a precedent for actually providing more per student. We do that for our ALE programs. We do it for Head Start programs. And so we need to recognize that these kids have challenges because of where they're coming from. And while they may not have access to some of the programs that cost a kid in a normal comprehensive high school, they have other challenges that I think outweigh those.
Okay. Any rebuttal there, Bill?
No.
Okay, we will go then to Paul.
Yeah, well, so if you don't know, Echo Glen is a school run by the Issaquah School District located in Snoqualmie that houses students who have committed felonies. Some of the really most challenging people challenging students that you could serve, and they're worth it. I mean, these are students who are still kids who have a whole life in front of them. And I mean, I'll tell you in all candor, I've been in meetings So I'm just a little bit of background. I'm a lawyer. I've done a lot of free work for foster kids and trial courts, and in Olympia, I spent a lot of my time working in the foster care system. And I've had meetings with colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have tried to tell me that some kids are simply irredeemable and aren't really worth it. And I refuse to believe that. I just don't think that's right. And I don't think it's right that students who have committed felonies should find themselves permanently disadvantaged and permanently in a place where they cannot redeem themselves. I think that they need to serve their time. I think they need to recognize what they've done, but I think they need to be given the chance at redemption. And I really think that they need to have the same amount of funding as other students.
Lisa?
We absolutely need to make a change with Echo Glen, and I think there's more than one institution across the state that we need to make sure and do this across the state. And it's very simply put, it's definitely underfunded. The ratio of adults to students is sorely lacking, and when you don't have that ratio there, then you can't do everything you need to do to be able to help grow each and every child. And each and every child, regardless of whether they're a teen up through the maximum age that can be served there, they absolutely have an opportunity and an ability to be educated and to learn and grow, and that's their best chance of changing the direction of their life. So I know very specifically, and this is exactly what I hope to do in 2019, is to move extra funding there to support, because the McCleary decisions and the decisions that were made around funding in this last legislative session did not account for any change in funding going out to Echo Glen. So in fact, what happened with the increase in funding for teacher salaries, it created a broader gap and a widening gap for the students at Echo Glen, and they're even more disadvantaged now than they were a year ago.
Paul, any further comments?
Yeah, I think you've got unanimous agreement up here about how important Echo Glen is and how important it is to be funded appropriately.
All right. Excuse me. So, Lisa, you're going to start with this question. For decades, society focused on managing homelessness, but recently we have come to realize the goal must be to end homelessness. What ideas do you support, including funding methods that would help to end homelessness?
I love the goal of ending homelessness, and I think there's so much that we can do. I think that just to start with, it's much cheaper for the state and for our society in general to make sure that people are staying in the homes that they have instead of trying to rehome somebody that's lost their home because of a catastrophic health event, for example. So we need to start there and making sure that we're providing opportunities to make that happen. I think we need to also make sure that we're providing safe places for people that are in any kind of crisis or mode to get through those crises, and then reentry and the social service support when and where they need them on the front lines is going to make that transition more readily available. Making sure that we're funding the housing trust funds for such a need as that is, I think, is paramount. What I'd like to see is how we're going to support our cities and our counties to making sure that we've got affordable housing options as well across every municipality, because if we can house workforce, if we can define what affordable housing is based off of the regional expenses, we have a better chance of making this happen.
Paul?
Homelessness kind of has two primary causes and needs to be addressed, I think, in two different ways in this state. One of them is that house prices have gone through the roof, especially here in the Central Puget Sound. Our economy has been good. We've been adding so many more people. When demand goes up, but supply stays the same, prices go up. And so there's a good amount of people who find themselves homeless because they've lost their job or because their rent has been increased and they can no longer afford it and they're homeless. The other part is much more difficult, and it's people for whom homelessness is one of a number of problems, including mental health issues, drug abuse issues, and all that kind of stuff. And those are much harder to get to. There are some good national programs that we should be following, like the DOE Fund in New York, that combines a no wrong door policy with a really high expectations policy, and you get phenomenal outcomes out of that. And then at the end of the day, when we do that, when we allow for greater housing stock and we take care of people, we have got to enforce the law at the end of the day. And I think that's one of the parts that's missing. We're just refusing to enforce the law, which I think makes things much worse.
And then Lisa, do you have a rebuttal?
So one of the things is making sure that we're creating an environment that doesn't create more of a housing affordability issue, and increasing our property taxes and making those decisions to do that is definitely pitting those on fixed incomes against like what our youth need in our education system. So we need to make sure that we're balancing that out, and there's avenues that we can definitely put in place to make sure that we're keeping those folks in our homes. And then to the issue of mental health and drug abuse and systems to put into place, that has not been a priority of the state to date and the legislature, so we need to make sure that we get there. Stop.
All right.
I'm not a
Chad
fan of the stop sign.
and Bill, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, I'm fine.
All right.
So homelessness, I take a free market approach because I look at the head tax, for example. It was only going to supply 300 units per year, and I just don't think that government can scale in the way that the free market can. But if you look at our supply issue right now, and Paul hit it on the head, we have not been keeping up with the demand. You've got Amazon bringing 50,000 high-paying jobs into Seattle. It's no surprise that we have 13,000 to 15,000 homeless right now. We need to build micro-housing, aggregate housing. So the dorms and boarding houses and barracks, what we experienced in the military, this is how you get high-density housing near where people work. And you know, for folks like my son, who's a senior at MIT, who was working at Google this summer, he would have loved to have access to a dorm-type environment, a boarding house, something like that, close to where he worked. But he doesn't have any equity. He can't buy a condo. And condos are, we've only had 30 condos built all of last year. So we've got some challenges as far as building what people need. And we can't residentially zone a city and only have 69% of it single-family homes like we've done in Seattle. We have to embrace the density.
Thank you. Yes, I think I'm one of the few candidates that's been endorsed by both the Housing Trust Fund and the Rental Housing Association, because I've sat down and I've already talked with these folks about sitting down and working out a plan to make new innovative ways to move about this, because it's going to be a combination of public and private. Neither one can do it on their own. The private sector provides most of the housing, and we need to continue to provide more and access to it. But prevention is really the critical key, because if you're trying to get a few folks out of homelessness, but you're getting more in there every day, you're never going to get there. So prevention is what we need, and we can do that to stop evictions when folks need a little hand sometimes, because you mentioned of a medical emergency in the family, a breakdown of a car, or for a small amount of funding, they lose and get evicted out of their house. And I don't know about you, but I can't come up with first, last, and security deposit for a new house if I lose my house because I'm $1,000 a month behind in my rent. So sometimes that $1,000 is a whole lot cheaper that we can give to someone to keep them on their feet and going in housing, and rather than losing it and never be able to get back again.
Chad?
Sometimes we have an inadvertent unintended consequence of some of our legislation. So for example, the Seattle City Council has effectively made it impossible to build congregate housing except on university campuses. Those kind of things need to be addressed immediately. And to build on Paul's point, it's not just about drug rehabilitation and mental health issues. I think we need CTE programs that are integrated so that people can retool for a new industry, because let's face it, we're not in a world where you can have the same occupation your entire life anymore. You have to be able to turn on a dime and learn a new occupation if you're losing your job.
Thank you. Next question, we're going to move on to the carbon tax. In 2016, voters defeated a proposed carbon tax. What's different in this year's Initiative 1631 other than calling it a fee? And what impact will it have on jobs in the Northwest? Do you support it? We're going to start with Paul.
No, I don't support it. The difference this year is that it's a much bigger tax. The initiative that was on the ballot 2 years ago at least included a cut in property and sales taxes that would have offset the increase in carbon taxes. This was merely a carbon tax, and it's got a number of problems. It exempts many of our largest polluters, so it won't actually get to the solution of reducing carbon emissions. It ends up being a gas tax that doesn't even go for roads. It ends up being a heating tax that adds an additional $300 a year to the average family's heating home costs. It will fall hardest on the poorest, and is a regressive negative tax that doesn't actually solve the problem it's meant to solve. It also is just rife with corruption. The board that is in charge of spending the new money is allowed to give its own organizations grants specifically. So you have people who are appointed, not elected, but appointed to spend a new slush fund of money and can spend it on their own money, on their own selves and their own organization. I think it's a really bad initiative, and I am opposed to it.
Lisa?
Again, I would say that 1631 exists only because the legislature hasn't taken action. So when you have partnerships, and this issue has been ripening, over the term ripening, we go through legislation, you go through the sausage making, you may have heard it talk about that. And as you're coming through each time, you're getting more stakeholders at the table, you're getting more voices at the table, and you're getting further along in the journey of trying to come up with a reasonable, sustainable legislation. And I think that 1631 is that next step, and it certainly is better than what we've got so far. So as you're moving forward in that direction, I think the areas of making sure that the poorest aren't hit, the regressiveness of the nature of anything that might be coming out as an unintended consequence from 1631 can be managed and can be dealt with through the legislature and needs to be dealt with. But we've got to take a stand. We know that the science is real. We know that we're not making progress on reducing our carbon. And until we start doing something and acting boldly about it, we're going to be in the same boat year after year.
Oh, your rebuttal, but also could you address what impact it might have on jobs?
Oh, yeah, it'll also harm jobs. I mean, it increases the cost of energy, which energy is linked with both employment and our state's domestic product. But there's simply no way to get around I mean, it is on its very face a regressive tax. It is a straight flat tax on a product that poor people spend more of their money on. There's simply no way to make this a progressive tax of any kind. And again, it won't even do what it's supposed to do. It's not like this is a bold action that's actually going to reduce carbon emissions. It doesn't even include airplanes, which are some of the biggest emitters, and by the way, which the rich tend to use much more than the poor do. It's a tax on the poor that doesn't actually do what it even is supposed to do. I am fully on board reducing carbon emissions and making the state smart environmental policy, but doing it on the backs of the poor is just wrong.
Okay. Bill, what have you got to say about carbon tax?
Well, and this is a tough one because I want to work to help protect the environment, and I come from the environmental stewardship side, and that is a concept I will always be working on, but I always will run things through a social equity filter. That's part of my background. And I am concerned that we're doing this, as Lisa mentioned, because the legislature hasn't taken action. That's why citizens create initiatives, because they want things to happen that the legislature hasn't done. But this, when you start putting fees on things, the standard way of our economics is it gets passed down to the consumer, and it gets passed down to the lower consumer until the fact that the person at the bottom is paying the higher gas tax, the higher heating bill, and I'm very concerned about that. So how we get that balance, and there's some provisions to try to balance that out, but I've been talking with a lot of people on how they're actually going to work, and I'm still working on this issue to figure out how we're going to balance that so that the person at the bottom of the economic scale doesn't get stuck with the bill. And I'm not quite sold one way or the other yet on this.
Hey, Jan?
So I've been working a lot on clean energy initiatives. I was the Republican co-sponsor of the bill to shut down the Puget Sound Energy's coal-by-wire program out of Montana. I passed a lot of electric vehicle legislation, but I can't get behind this bill because I believe that we already have a carbon tax. It's called the gas tax. Not many people realize that 96% of our electricity production in this state is zero emission sourced. 96%. The lion's share of our emissions come from internal combustion engines on our roads. And so the gas tax is a particularly appropriate way to focus on that area. It has less than 0.5% of administrative overhead. It's protected by the 18th Amendment, so the money's spent on roads in very predictable ways. It can't be gamed politically, as Paul mentioned. So I like our gas tax. The oversight issue is an important piece. And I also want to make sure that we're reflecting the total cost of environmental impact when we look at these industries that are having a big environmental impact. It's really important that we not just focus on carbon. Water and air quality are very important to me. That's the National Ambient Air Quality Standards and the Mobile Source Air Toxics.
Yeah, Bill, any last thoughts?
Yeah, just again, the carbon issue is such a critical piece because it does deal with our future. And balancing that with right now the cost of paying for that, we're going to have to keep figuring how to balance those two priorities at times, and making sure that I would say the lower the person, some part of the society doesn't pay the cost for that. So I will continue to work on that. I think we can do some good stuff. If we get the legislature that can act because they're not in gridlock, then that will be a way to really get into the details of this and really make a really fine, much finer solution.
Right, thank you. Our next question is on taxes. Do you support a state income tax or capital gains tax? What would you do to provide ongoing property tax relief? And we're going to start with Chad on this question.
So 9 times it's been on the ballot, 9 times the people have spoken. I do not support an income tax, nor do the folks of the 5th District. A capital gains tax, as the IRS clarified just this week, is a type of income tax, and so I put that in the same boat. We cleared that I don't support a carbon tax or a head tax. Now, property tax equity, I fought hard during the McCleary situation because the primary state funding source for our schools in the state is the Common Schools Levy. And so when we absorbed a lot of the local funds being spent on schools at the state level, we increased the Common Schools Levy. And we knew that that was going to have an impact, particularly in those areas that were paying considerably less than the average property tax rate. And so it was frustrating to me that we raised that this year and then didn't lower the local ones until next year. So we have this 1-year spike in property taxes, and a lot of folks in fixed incomes are really feeling that pinch right now. I proposed a measure that would increase the exemption. Right now it's $20,000 or $40,000 for a couple. We should increase that because of the additional share we picked up on the state level, and I think that's a start, but we need to be sensitive to those on a fixed income.
Bill?
I'm not for income tax. I'm not supporting that. But I'd like to look at property tax relief. I think that's a critical piece. I've been talking to a lot of folks. I've knocked on 12,000 doors already, and that is a big issue with what the legislature, and there's some folks that put the whole burden of the increased taxes on our property taxes in our district. I'm not sure why we vote for increasing our district and then support decreasing taxes in Eastern Washington. I want to represent our district, and to take a vote that says let's increase our property taxes fully in this district and reduce them for other folks in the state, that is not representing our district. So we need to get some property tax equity. There's absolute with that because there was too much here. The Democrats have put in a $500 million reduction of property tax coming back next year after this big increase this year, trying to balance that out because of the push of some of the folks in the legislature that block doing it any other way. So yes, on property tax equity.
So the Democrats with single-party rule this year did manage to put something in a property tax relief next year. And in the process, they had to raid the rainy day fund to do it. And with $2.3 billion of unexpected revenue this year, I was surprised that they had to go to the rainy day fund in order to get that funding. I actually negotiated the taxpayer protections that are in McCleary, and half of our districts ended up netting less. State and local combined, they got a reduction in their property taxes after next year. Unfortunately, Issaquah was one of the ones that did go up, but it didn't go up by much.
All right. Excuse me, thank you. All right, Lisa, you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
All right. Do you support a state income tax or capital gains tax? What would you do to provide ongoing property tax relief?
I do not support an income tax at this point. I think that, as was stated, the voters have spoken several times on that. Until we understand how we can do any kind of additional taxing structure that is really instead of an and tax, and we're looking at that, then I think that's the conversation that we need to have. I think that's the concern and worry when you add in an additional tax, that it's just one more additional burden to take on in affordability, which makes it more aggressive. So from my perspective, certainly focusing on property tax and making it a more equitable property tax structure is paramount, and I would like to try to do that by making sure that we're really doing a full transparency look at any of our tax exemptions that we have on the books right now, making sure that the loopholes that are in place are really earning the greater good and have public interest. I think we will find that some do, and I think that we will find that some don't. And I think when you're looking at the budget, if you're looking at it from a transparent perspective and you have in front of you when you're setting those priorities what you're going to do, then you can make that decision wisely each year.
Well, I think the question included capital gains tax as well, and so I look forward to hearing your answer in your next 30 seconds. I oppose an income tax and a capital gains tax, and it's a bizarre time to be talking about new taxes because this state has far more tax money than I thought it was going to have. We had $2.3 extra billion going into this last year, and we have an extra $800 million extra dollars right now, more than we thought we were going to have. That's just because the economy is good. It remains the truth that the best form of new tax revenue is a good economy, and if we start putting on new taxes here, if we have an income tax, if we have a capital gains tax, it will drive away some of the really great companies that want to work here and want to set up shop and want to grow here. I think that we have this goose running around laying a golden egg, and we should not kill that right now. When it comes to property tax relief, that's my top budgetary issue. Again, we have $800 million extra dollars, more than we thought we were going to after doubling K-12 funding over the last 6 years. I think that when the state can fund its priorities and still have that much extra money, we deserve to give it back to you taxpayers in the form of property tax relief.
So I will answer the question about capital gains. Thank you for reminding me. So certainly from my perspective, we need to hit with the additional new revenue first and find out how far that goes. I think in previous forums, there's been a lot of discussion about where we need to add mental health supports. We need to do more here. We need to do more there. And that's from everybody that's sitting up here on the table. So the question is, how is that funded and how are those priorities funded? And where does that come from, and see where that revenue comes from. But again, as I started at the very beginning of my conversation, I think we have to be very careful to make sure that we're not adding more regressiveness, that we do have equity, and that we are actually making sure that we're doing, and instead of tax balance, we have one tax pie. We need to make sure that that slice of each person is the same and equitable slice.
Okay, next question, and we will begin with Bill. If we can keep answers a little bit shorter, we're still hoping to get a few questions in here. Okay? Logging on state forest produces revenue for K through 12 school construction. Many believe that logging of these forests at current levels are not sustainable and not sound environmental policy. Would you support legislation that reforms state forest management while reducing the dependency of schools on natural resource logging? Bill?
Ask a forester this question. Okay. So having managed national forests for 30 years, I truly understand good forest management. And we have a lot of great state forest lands. We have a state that grows great trees, and we do need to manage that well for the health of the forest, considering everything we're looking at with fire concerns that they have nowadays and everything else that's going on. We do need to have healthy forest management. But funding for educating kids should not be dependent on extractable resources. That doesn't make sense to me because it's balancing one thing against another. We need to manage land for the purpose of managing land in a sound biological way, and that's good forest management, and we need to educate our kids with sound funding that keeps that funding steady and gives them a good education. The two should not be mixed together. It doesn't make sense. So we need to separate those two so that we educate our kids well as we want to, and manage our forests well as we should.
So the current system is that the federal government will actually send money to these districts that lose revenue because the assessed value that's lost because they're federal forests on their lands. And I think what the state does is reprehensible. We actually reduce our funding to those districts a commensurate amount, so they basically don't come out ahead at all. The other thing, too, is that it's very inconsistent about whether districts are getting this federal money or not, depending on what type of forest or what type of park that they have inside their districts. I really would like to see the focus more on an equitable system. Capital improvements is one of the areas we didn't make much progress on with McCleary. We really have good operational funding right now, but if you want to go build a school, we very, very much are on our own when it comes to passing those bonds, particularly in this area. And coming to stewardship, I really believe in working forests because I think we have better stewardship and we're less likely to have wildfires. I want to see us. I'll stop.
Bill, any?
Sure. Just comment that I'm one of the few folks that have been endorsed by Forest Protection Society and school education folks and other conservation groups, because they know my background and skills in this area. I know what we need to do on the biological point, and we need to work on that and get our forests managed well so they're healthy and doing what they're supposed to do. Now, we need to educate our kids, and we can't tie the two together. That's just what we can't do.
Okay. Paul, what say you on schools and logging?
We manage our state forests pretty badly here. You've seen that in the air this year. So much of the cause of the wildfires that happened this year and happened last year are the result of poor forest management practices on our state and federal lands. We need to fix that. I am a Republican conservationist. I mean, I sit on the board of advisors for the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust, which buys and protects green spaces from the Yakima Valley to the Puget Sound. And I think that, I mean, we live here because we're surrounded by forests and trees, and they provided us both beauty and then also working forests for the length of our state's history and even before that. And I think that we can do a much better job of stewarding those resources, of managing them well, and of making sure that they are both working so that we can have funding for schools and for other things. They're a small part of funding for schools, but they do actually matter. But then also so that we can make sure that we replant them well and that we actually manage them to reduce wildfires.
Hey, Lisa?
The funding that's coming from our trust lands into our schools is not huge in the 5th legislative district, but it is definitely significant for some districts across the state. And serving on the State School Directors Association Legislative Committee, I have a good understanding. They actually have a trust funds task force, and they have recommendations that they bring forward as a voice to see how we can work together. I think from my perspective, healthy forest management needs to be a priority for, as stated across the dais here, for a lot of reasons. Primarily what we need to do around schools, making sure that we actually can build the buildings that we need and have up-to-date. That's a bigger, larger issue that should be independent of our trust lands. The funding that's coming from there is critical, but it does need to be replaced, and we need to find a different revenue stream to support it.
Any last thoughts, Paul?
In the interest of time, let's move on.
All right. Next question is, the Growth Management Act was approved nearly 30 years ago. Some of the 13 primary objectives are sprawl reduction, environmental protection, and affordable housing. In your view, has GMA met the objectives? What aspects of the GMA need to be revisited to accomplish its goals? So I think, Lisa, we're starting with you on this question.
So for the Growth Management Act, I certainly come front and center with that when we're dealing with schools and in our school board policy, because we cannot build schools outside of the urban growth boundary, which is defined by the Growth Management Act. Even if we have kids that live out, significant portions of our kids out, we need to now move and bus them into schools if we build new schools that don't already exist out in that area. So those tensions are at play. I feel like it is helping to minimize the sprawl. I think we can keep it within the development going, but in so doing, and protecting our environment and our forested hillsides that are beyond the urban growth boundary, there is significant tension that our municipalities are facing on taking on the growth that they're required to take. And part of that is the decrease in the affordable housing and the competition for the land that's within the urban growth boundary. So those are the tensions that are at play. Those are the things that we have to work together at. Those are the things that I have been doing very actively, even with the Issaquah City Council, with Sammamish City Council, on the Issaquah School Board, to figure out how we manage our growth and we manage the affordability within the urban, I'm looking at the stop sign, within the urban growth boundary. So those are the tensions that I think takes extreme collaboration, and I think that we need to continue to pursue and work on those. And there's pathways forward so that we can protect our environment and we can protect against sprawl, and also have affordable housing.
The Growth Management Act is a 30-year-old law, and the entire idea behind it was that urban areas would take substantial density and then rural areas would remain sort of how they were, and neither of those has actually come to pass. We need substantial reform on both sides of that. On the urban density, one of the greatest causes of or contributors to inequality in the country, and this comes from Barack Obama's chair of his Council of Economic Advisors, is restrictive zoning laws, especially restrictive density zoning laws. NIMBYism is alive and well, and we need to have new laws. I'm introducing a bill that would say that if the state is putting up money for large transportation areas, so like new sound transit hubs, things like that, then cities are not allowed to restrict density growth right around there. Like if the state's going to put up money to have big transportation projects, the only way those actually make sense is with heavily dense areas around there. So like having more density in our cities, especially around our jobs and then around our transportation hubs, is both good for affordable housing and it's also good to address inequality.
Lisa?
So that's right there, the tension, right? That's the tension that's at play, trying to find land within the urban growth areas and how we're going to transition that. So if you have a town like the city of Issaquah that has an old town feel and a character, that's going to significantly change when you bring in large density in your downtown corridor. So those are the tools and the things that we need to listen to our cities to make sure that we are, as a state, supporting that, not only supporting their ability to manage that change and growth, but provide infrastructure support. Then the growth is coming faster than they're able to actually afford in their coffers.
Thank you. All right, Chad?
So I actually chaired the Joint Legislative Task Force on School Siting, and I testified to the PSRC, the Puget Sound Resource Council, on this issue back when I was president of the school board. I completely agree with Lisa on this. I just want to jump ahead to infrastructure investment. This has been a huge issue for the 5th District. I've already filmed 2 videos online on this issue alone. We have a 6,050 home Black Diamond development that's going on right now, and we don't have the traffic corridor, the infrastructure investment to get those people to work or get them to school even. We had this huge development up on Snoqualmie Ridge, and we have congestion every day at the interchange of SR 18 and 90 because people were not thinking ahead. The promise of the Growth Management Act is that if we had central planning, if we were able to anticipate where the density was going to be built, that we could build out the infrastructure ahead of time. But they've fallen flat on that promise, and the worst cases are usually when the state's in charge. So SR 18 was late to the game. I'm glad we got it accelerated by 6 years, but 169 hasn't even been touched yet. And I personally, okay.
Bill?
Thank you. I'm glad we have the GMA. If we did not have that for the last 30 years, we'd be looking like Arizona, where they just build forever and ever and just spread out. That sprawl is an important thing that has kept this country around here looking the way people want it. So that has been a good move on the GMA. It has helped protect our environment. That's definitely good. It has had an effect on affordable housing and some other things as well. Now, you take any policy that's been in place for 30 years, and if you're smart, you will review that policy and take a look and see if there's some tweaking that might need to be done for some of the unintended consequences that have happened. But it does not to be revamped. It does not to need to be thrown out. I've heard people say you should unleash the developers and just let them build where they can or want to. That's not the solution. We do need to have that control of zoning, and we need to protect our environment and protect from sprawl. So we can look at that overall and have some slight tweaks to it, but overall I think it's done a good job of protecting what we want to protect in our communities.
Chad, 30 seconds?
No, in the interest of time.
All right, thank you very much. So we are finished with our pre-planned questions, so we're going to wrap up this portion. And so now we're going to have questions posed by the candidates to their opponents. So Chad, if you would please begin with your question for Bill.
So Bill, you've made your position on income tax, and I wasn't clear on the capital gains tax there. I'd like it if you could clarify that. Also, you have, the Democrats have one-party control down in Olympia right now. You've got the governor's mansion and both chambers. I'm wondering, why, you mentioned gridlock earlier, why we haven't been able to get stuff done this year when, the Democrats were in control, and in past years when they have been in control. I guess my ultimate question for you is, do you believe that we have a better work product when both parties are at the table and can collaborate on legislation together? Or are you of the opinion that it's better if the Democrats are completely in charge?
Well, I do believe in bipartisanship. Coming from city council, which is by design, nonpartisan. And having worked in the federal sector, I'm used to dealing with nonpartisan, bipartisan issues. So that is the way to get things done the best way, because you have everybody working on together from all the different ideas. So that is true. But when I refer to some of the gridlock that's happened, you look back just other than the last 2 months of session, when things have been locked up because of not letting bills come to the floor, or not letting the capital budget be passed because of people locking things up. That's the gridlock I'm referring to. So I do believe in working together, and I think we can do that, and I think that's what I will do, because that's what I bring. The theme of my campaign is there's more that unites us than not, and I've proven that in my work in the city council and other city commissions and other places I've worked.
All right. Bill, your question to Chad.
One question. Chad, the number one problem that everyone agrees upon in our district is traffic. In the past, during your time in the legislature, you have voted against the transportation package, which included Highway 18 and the I-90 interchange. Your Republican seatmate, our Democratic senator, and many in the Republican Party supported this transportation bill. How can you tell us that you are for transportation fixes when you have consistently been against them, rather than supporting the number one issue that is affecting most people in our district?
So when you get down in Olympia, you'll realize the way to get things done is to withhold your support early for a bill, to use it as negotiating power. In my case, I was using my vote when the chair of the House Transportation Committee was whipping votes for the package. She came to me and asked me what I wanted for my support, and I held out for State Route 169, the widening project from Jones Road to Maple Valley, because I think that was critical for our district in order to provide that infrastructure for those new developments. Ultimately, she would not give that, and so I had to follow through and vote no on that package, or else I won't be able to be taken seriously next time. And so, yes, that's a bit of the game of working down Olympia. That does not mean that I'm pro-congestion. In fact, I've very adamantly been working to reduce congestion and take the 60% of transportation funding that's currently going to mass transit, which only represents 3.6%. It's actually closer to 70 now after Sound Transit 3, and make sure that we get a more representative sample spent on building our roads. Was there? Oh, sorry, I missed that.
All right, Lisa, your question for Paul, please.
How do we reconcile women's safety and the need to hold people accountable for sexual assault, abuse, and harassment when the crimes, or these types of crimes, are often unseen and hidden, and we have a federal climate like we do, and we know that we've seen some step back on some laws at our universities and that culture and climate. So how do you solve that? I know you've got a legal background, so how do you attack that problem?
It's really hard. We're starting right now in the State House of Representatives. My colleagues selected me to be on the Sexual Harassment Prevention Task Force in the state capitol itself. If you followed the news, you know that legislators of both parties have acted really reprehensibly. It's one of the hardest things to address, both at the state capitol and then statewide, because it's a culture issue, and changing the culture through legislation is really, really hard. I've been really proud to work with men and women of good faith on both sides of the aisle to try to say that it's not okay to treat women badly. It's never okay to treat women inappropriately. And for whatever it's worth, I won't go into too many of the details, but somebody I'm very, very close to went through sexual assault. And it's brutal, and it's really challenging, and it's really, really hard, because so many of the situations involve people who the victim knows, and trying to get justice for somebody you know can be so difficult. But I can tell you that, I mean, I've tried to treat absolutely everybody with respect. I'll keep doing that. And I think at the end of this process, you're going to get to, you didn't say stop yet.
Yep.
What?
Sorry.
He did.
Okay.
All right, Paul, your question to Lisa.
Well, Lisa, which parts of the Democratic Party platform do you disagree with?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. So from my perspective, it's really not about party platform. It's really about making sure that you have all the stakeholders at the table to make the decision. It was interesting to me when you're coming from a school board background and you've been dealing with policy and you've been dealing with very controversial issues like equity in your district. It is really not about what platform or what is the issue. It's really about what you feel is the right thing to create the greater good for every resident in the state. And for me, that means making sure that you're listening to your residents in the 5th Legislative District, that you're representing them, and that you're paying attention to how you have and who's being impacted, are there winners and losers, and making decisions based off of that. And that's really the crux of it all. So in the work that I've done as the school board director, you'll know that I'm deeply engaged in my community. I dive deeply in every issue and get educated on every issue to understand that background, and then I vote accordingly. So from that perspective, it's not, to me, about a platform. It's really about what we need to do for not only the 5th Legislative District, but for every resident in our district and the state.
Thank you. Those were good questions. Each candidate now has 1 minute for their closing remarks. We began tonight with Chad, so we're going to start with Bill, then Chad, followed by Paul, and then Lisa.
Well, first, thank you very much for having this forum. I'm glad we were here. I want to just remind myself, I really feel I'm uniquely qualified to represent this district because I worked and lived in very many parts of it. They're both rural and the cities. To connect those two is what we need to do to make this community work really well. Connect those rural areas and the cities. As mentioned, there's traffic going all in between those two areas, and they are all connected, and we have to get them work together on a more regional level, and that I will bring to them, bring forward, working with the rural folks to understand them, and the city folks to understand their different issues and concerns, and my professional expertise in both environmental stewardship and in transportation is something that I will just bring with me and be able to really work on these traffic and transportation issues, which I know are number one from folks in the district, because, as I say, I've knocked on a lot of doors and talked to a lot of people. Traffic is definitely the number one concern, and I will put everything I have behind working on that issue for sure. Thank you, and I want to earn your vote.
Okay, Chad.
Thanks. Unfortunately, talk is cheap in politics. There's not a lot of accountability for what people say in the campaign trail, and there's almost an expectation that we'll tell you things that we won't be able to follow through on. But I have followed through on those things. I came up through the ranks. I've done this job 2 terms. I've never gotten anything less than an outstanding rating from the Municipal League of King County. And they not only call the people that we recommend as referrals, they'll call our counterparts in the other side of our committees that we're ranking members are. And when we're negotiating these McCleary deals, they'll call the people on the other side and see what we were like to work with. I'm proud of my record, and I've been able to do it as a moderate, too. 93% of the legislature was more partisan in their voting record when I was in the legislature than I was. Despite being socially progressive, I was still elected to caucus leadership my first term and put in positions of great responsibility. So I really feel that the areas I've been able to focus on, school funding, charter schools, computer science education, truancy, teacher shortages, electric vehicle and clean energy, and the cybercrime bill, where I built coalitions of members from both sides of the aisle to get things done and find that common ground. That's shown that I'm not just talking the talk, I'm walking the walk. And I would appreciate your support to return to Olympia.
Oh.
Thank you all again so much for coming out tonight. This is not nearly enough time to get into all the issues, but I am just grateful that you would be here tonight. I just want to end by letting you know that I think at the end of the day in a race like this, it's worth looking at candidate endorsements. I have the endorsements of the Seattle Times, of the League of Education Voters, the Children's Campaign Fund, Stand for Children, WACOPS, the Washington Fire Chiefs, the Association of Washington Business, among others. And I think I got that diverse group of endorsements because I'm willing to be independent. I'm willing to tell my party when it's wrong. I'm always willing to vote for my constituents over my party or any particular special interest, and I've been able to do it with compassion as well. Again, I've done a substantial amount of free legal work in my career for foster kids in trial courts. For my work, I was named the Pro Bono Lawyer of the Year by King County's leading foster youth advocacy organization. I've tried to bring that same kind of compassion and dedication on your behalf to Olympia, and I'm going to keep doing it as long as you give me the chance. Thank you very much.
So thank you for this opportunity. I definitely want to reach out to everyone here in the room and definitely those that are watching to make sure that you feel free, because there is not enough time to go through and answer your specific questions. So please reach out to me. On my website, you have my cell phone number, you have my email. I would love to have that conversation with you and find out if I'm the right candidate for you. So I think for me, what it really boils down to is making sure that you've got people that will represent you, represent your voice, make sure that every voice is at the table, because that's how we're going to get good, sustainable policy that's going to be for the greater good for everybody in our area. We know that we have significant issues around growth and traffic and affordability and healthcare, and we know that we've got a lot of work to do. So you've got to have somebody who's willing to have those conversations, willing to dive deep in them, willing to listen, and then willing to take action. Education takes over 53% of the budget. We need people in the legislature that knows how to get the greatest impact out of those dollars, how to make sure that you can collaborate and understand fiscal responsibility around all of that, and making sure that we're putting our people first. Thank you, and I appreciate it, and I hope I earn your vote.
Thank you, candidates. Thank you for agreeing to come tonight and for agreeing to serve the 5th District in the past and in the future. Your service is very much appreciated. The citizens are lucky to have 4 really good qualified candidates to choose from. Good luck to each of you as you complete your campaigns over the next 6 weeks. The Cable TV Commission and staff have been recording tonight's forum to be replayed every day until the election on City Channel 21 and streamed on the city's website. So please tell your friends, if they weren't able to come, to tune in. Audience, thank you for coming tonight. Good night.
It was a fun time. See you next Tuesday.
Get your every other hour sleep.
Yeah, no kidding. Actually, I'm exhausted.
I know, I remember the feeling well.